In chapter 4, we wrap up our discussion on the first article of the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. There are some big scientific questions that could be asked in this chapter about creation and the origin of the universe, but let's save those for another day. Instead, the chapter begins with what I think are much harder questions. If God is the maker of heaven and earth, why are they such different places? If God created all things, why do things fall apart? If God made the visible and invisible, does he have something to hide? See, we want a universe created by God to always make sense. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes it doesn't. We can explain away these inconsistencies with stock answers. Sin messed up God's plan, or God works in mysterious ways. But the reality remains that every day, heaven pulls us one way and earth the other. How do we reconcile that? By remembering what the Creed tells us. God created them both. Chapter 4 is one of my favorite chapters, and it starts with a line from one of my favorite books, On the Lord's Prayer by Cyprian of Carthage. Cyprian goes through the Lord's Prayer line by line, much like we're doing with the Nicene Creed. When he arrived at the familiar phrase, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven," Cyprian said this: "We possess the body from earth and the spirit from heaven. We ourselves are earth and heaven." If you only read one book from the early church, make it this one. It's so short, it's less than 30 pages, but it's so rich. I just want to read some more of what Cyprian wrote to you, more than I was able to fit into the chapter. "For since we possess the body from earth and the spirit from heaven, we ourselves are earth and heaven. And in both, that is, both the body and the spirit, we pray that God's will may be done. For between the flesh and the spirit there is a struggle, and there is a daily strife as they disagree one with the other. Therefore we ask that by the help and assistance of God, agreement is made between these two natures, so that the will of God is done in both the spirit and the flesh, and that the will of God concerning us should be done both in heaven and in earth, because this is the will of God, that earthly things should give way to heavenly, and that spiritual and divine things should prevail." But do they? Does heaven or earth come out ahead more often in your life? A little later, Cyprian addresses those Christians who are still on earth and have not yet begun to be heavenly. If we're being honest with ourselves, that's us. When given the choice between heaven and earth, we choose earth. But should it even be a choice? God created them both. That means the will of God can be done in earth and in heaven, both in the spirit and in the flesh. In another place, Cyprian said that we pray for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, not that God should do as he wills, but that we may be able to do what God wills. He goes on to explain what this means in one of the most powerful passages in the entire book. Listen to this. "Now, the will of God is that which Christ both did and taught: humility in conversation, steadfastness in faith, modesty in words, justice in deeds, mercifulness in works, discipline in morals, to be unable to do a wrong and to be able to bear a wrong, to keep peace with the brethren, to love God with all one's heart, to love him in that he is a father, to fear him in that he is God, to prefer nothing whatever to Christ because he did not prefer anything to us, to adhere inseparably to his love, to stand by his cross bravely and faithfully. This is to desire to be fellow heirs with Christ. This is to do the commandment of God. This is to fulfill the will of the Father. Does that describe your life? It can. And for Cyprian, it did. He lived in a difficult period of church history. He was born about 125 years before the Council of Nicaea and was Bishop of Carthage during what is known as the Decian persecution. The Roman Emperor Decius commanded that every citizen of the empire sacrifice to the pagan gods and prove they did it by signing a libellus, or little book. If they didn't, they could lose everything from their personal property to their lives. And many Christians did. But others fell away. They offered the sacrifices or signed the book saying they did. Eventually, the persecution ended. And when it was over and all the Christians who signed the book wanted to come back to church, Cyprian asked them bluntly, "And do you think that you are a Christian if you are ashamed or afraid to be a Christian?" Today, there are no sacrifices to offer or little books to sign, but there are countless opportunities for us to be Christians, where we must ask ourselves if heaven or earth is more real to us. When we vote, when we go to work or school or the gym, even in the middle of rush hour traffic. These are moments where we can go with the crowd and do what everyone else is doing, or we can, as Cyprian said, begin to be heavenly in our thoughts, in our actions, and in our desires. I hope chapter 4 will help you make that choice.